I didn't feel sad. At least, nothing inside me suggested that sadness was present. There was no heaviness, no pressure, no emotional weight I could clearly identify. The day felt neutral. The mood felt stable. Nothing felt broken. From the outside, everything appeared normal. I woke up when I usually do. I went where I needed to go. I spoke when someone spoke to me. Nothing slowed me down. Nothing disrupted the rhythm. And yet, something felt off. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just quietly enough to be noticed. I became aware of it in how emotions arrived. The pause before a reaction, the space after a response, the stillness that followed moments that should have felt fuller. Those spaces felt slightly longer than usual. Not uncomfortable, just noticeable. I was still present, still functioning, but I wasn't connected in the same way. Emotions reached me and moved on. Reactions appeared, but didn't linger. Expressions felt correct, yet slightly distant, as if they belonged to someone close, but not entirely to me. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt urgent. It was more like a subtle emotional distance, as if I had been standing inside myself for a long time, and then, without moving, I had stepped back just enough to observe. Everything in front of me remained unchanged, but the way I experienced it had shifted. I paid attention to how normal everything still looked. I smiled when it made sense. I nodded at the right moments. I said the kinds of things people expect to hear. If someone had asked how I was feeling, I would have answered without hesitation, and the answer would have sounded honest. That was the confusing part, because inside I could feel distance, but I couldn't explain it. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't emptiness. It was a feeling without a clear label, a quiet awareness that something in me was no longer fully aligned with the moment. I tried to treat it like nothing. I kept moving, kept completing tasks, kept following the day from one moment to the next. But the distance remained. I noticed it in repetition. The same conversations, the same surroundings, the same moments repeating in familiar ways. Everything recognizable, yet slightly less personal. Not cold, not detached, just less immediate. As if life was unfolding in front of me, and I was participating from a small step away. I didn't resist it. I didn't try to force myself to feel more. I simply noticed that I wasn't feeling the way I expected to, and that awareness changed something. Because once you notice emotional distance, even a subtle one, the moment can no longer feel fully automatic. Everything continued as usual. Time moved forward. People interacted. Life maintained its structure, and I moved within it, aware that something felt distant without knowing exactly why. I noticed it in my own reactions, not in what I expressed, but in how little emotion was attached to it. I could engage with someone and realize afterward that I had been responding from habit, like my reactions were doing their job while something deeper stayed quiet. I noticed it when I reflected on my own day. The schedule made sense. The responsibilities were manageable. The interactions were familiar. But I felt slightly separated from the experience of it all. Not numb, just observing. As if I had stepped back inside myself and started watching everything more carefully. Even small emotional choices felt different. What to care about, when to respond, how deeply to engage. They didn't feel difficult, they just felt less natural. I had to consciously participate instead of letting emotion carry me forward. And that awareness was new. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't a realization, it was quiet, and because it was quiet, it was easy to question, but it kept returning in the same calm way, at the same moments, as if it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I started to notice how often I searched for proof that I felt the way I was supposed to feel. A stronger emotion, a clearer reaction, a sense of emotional presence. When it wasn't there, I didn't panic. I just noticed the distance. And that distance changed the texture of everything, not the events, not the circumstances, just the way they were experienced and the way they passed through me. I didn't mention it to anyone. There was nothing to explain, but I carried the distance with me, quietly, through the same spaces and the same hours, aware that something had shifted without leaving a visible mark. I didn't react to it. There was nothing to fix, no problem to solve, no explanation to search for. The distance didn't feel urgent. It didn't demand action. It simply existed alongside everything else. I let the day continue without correcting myself. I didn't force emotion into my voice. I didn't try to convince myself that everything was fine. I didn't try to remove the distance. I let it stay quietly, like a detail I was allowed to acknowledge. The strange thing was how normal everything still felt. People still spoke the same way. Places still felt familiar. My routine still held together. And yet, the inside of it felt slightly altered, as if a small part of me had shifted position and changed how everything was experienced. The distance didn't grow stronger. It didn't fade either. It stayed subtle, almost easy to overlook if I chose not to focus on it. And maybe that was the point. Not every emotional shift announces itself. Some changes arrive quietly without asking to be noticed. They don't interrupt your life. They don't demand a response. They simply settle in and change how things are felt from the inside. Nothing around me needed to change. Nothing needed to be fixed or explained to anyone else. I didn't need to name what I felt to allow it to exist. I simply continued, aware that something had shifted, without needing to understand it fully. I noticed how quickly my mind wanted to explain it, to give it a reason, to connect it to something specific, to make it make sense. But the distance resisted that. It stayed simple. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't an answer. It was just a state, small enough to live with, real enough to acknowledge. And once I stopped trying to explain it, it became easier to carry. Not because I understood it, but because I stopped demanding that I should. I kept moving through the same hours, doing the same things, with a quiet awareness beneath everything, as if I was learning, for the first time, that my inner world could shift without asking permission, and still, life would continue. I didn't feel sad, but I felt strangely distant.